It's that time of the year. It's time for us to start our holiday builds. So it's getting cooler outside and the holidays are coming up. So in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to make a guaranteed bestseller, not only for this holiday season, but year round. So what would you say if I told you that you could build something like this for $2? Well, I'm about to teach you exactly how to do it, just using simple tools and a very simple jig. Let's dive in. So this project is one that I've been wanting to do for a while because it deals with acute angles. For some reason, if something can't be cut on a miter saw, a lot of the times we avoid doing that project. I'm going to show you just how easy it is to make. And to help to prove a point on the profitability of this project, I'm going to be using a fence picket for one version of this. And then this piece of scrap wood. Okay, so it's just an old piece of wood. It's split down the middle. I don't even know why I kept it, but I'm going to use it. So for both of these builds, we're going to be cutting pieces that look something like this. Okay, so we have a super acute angle over here, a 30-degree angle on this side. If we were only doing 30-degree angles, we could do that on the miter saw alone, no issues. But since we have one angle that's too sharp to cut on the miter saw, I'm going to show you a way to do that on the table saw, just using a simple jig like this. This is literally a jig made out of scrap wood. So let's get started. So I'm going to start off by cutting my material into 2.5-inch strips. Now this is one of those projects where the width of your strips at the beginning are going to determine the size of the finished product. By using 2.5-inch strips, this star is going to be 18 inches wide and right about 2 foot long. And like always, I'm going to be showing you step by step and teaching you everything that you need to know on how to make this. But if you're a plans in the hand type of person, head over to my website. I'll also make sure to include the jig and some printable templates that will make this even easier. Okay, so now that we have our strips all cut down, I'm going to go ahead and make this jig. So one of the things that we're going to be using for this, you may recognize these from a previous video where I was teaching people how to make super acute angles just using the miter saw. Well, let's say that you did not make a set of these, which you should, they're pretty handy. I'm going to show you the simplified way to make these cuts if you haven't already made this jig. So for this first little block on my jig here, I need it to be a 60-degree cut, but my miter saw will only go to 50 degrees. So a quick little workaround for this is to just take a piece of scrap wood, set your miter saw to 45 degrees. We'll make a cut into the scrap wood at 45 degrees. Then we're going to use this cut board as our new starting point. So let's say that we place a board against our 45 degrees and make a cut with our miter saw set at 90. It's actually going to cut a 45-degree angle onto our board. So since 45 degrees will be our new 0, and I'm wanting 60 degrees, if we set our miter saw to 15 degrees, we'll actually get a 60-degree cut. I know that this can be confusing, but don't blame me. Blame whoever decided to mess up the gauge on a miter saw to begin with. So with a scrap piece of 2x4 against my board at 45 degrees, my miter saw set at 15 degrees, let's make this 60-degree miter cut. And you can use either side of this 2x4. They're both cut at 60 degrees. So I'm just going to use this little cut off. And while we're at the miter saw, let's go ahead and cut our second block of the jig. For this, we won't be needing our extra 45-degree board. We're just going to set our miter saw to 22.5 degrees and make a cut. Okay, so now that we have our two little wedges cut, you're just going to need a scrap piece of plywood of some sort that has a nice straight edge on two sides. These will ride against our table saw fence. And then to put this jig together, we're just going to glue each one of these blocks in opposite corners. Now you can use wood glue for this and wait around for it to dry. I'm just going to use some CA glue, that way we can keep on rolling. Okay, so now that we have our jig made, let's grab a couple of screws in our wood strips and head over to the table saw. All right, so the idea behind this jig is that it can ride against this fence. We can take a piece of our wood, place it up against one of our blocks, and as this runs through, it's going to cut this acute angle into the end of our board. The back end is going to eventually hit this fence. So let's go ahead and use our spacer board between our fence and our jig. Now with our spacer board in place, you'll just set your fence so that the edge of your jig is touching the saw blade. And just FYI, if you made this jig from one of my previous videos, this would be all that you would need for this project. If you haven't, I'll make sure to throw a link in the description. Alright, so we're about ready to make our cuts. One last thing that I'm going to do just to kind of help hold everything into place, I'm going to set my material onto my jig for reference, and then install a couple of screws beside my material just to help hold all my parts into place. Once I have my first side set, I'll just swing it around and do the exact same thing for my second block. So now with our jig fully assembled, let's cut some wood. So since we're over here on our 22.5 degree block, Let's go ahead and start off with this cut. And essentially what I want to look for each one of these cuts is that the tip of our board is flush with the edge of our jig. Once we get that in place, now let's make our cut. We'll just pull our jig and our board back, flip the jig around, rotate our material, and line up our top edge with the outside of our board. And once you have that in place, let's make our second cut. And this is the first piece of our star. Essentially, the main part of this star is made up of 12 of these parts. In order to get that, it's all that we have to do is keep rotating our jig after each cut. All right, so this is where we're at right now. We have 12 of these pieces, and I actually had only used 1/2 of our fence picket. So if you want a simple version of this star, you could actually get 2 of these out of 1 fence picket. So about $1 a piece. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So now to put all of our little parts together, we're simply going to make this kind of a diamond shape. If this was actually making a perfect diamond, we could have made all the cuts in the miter saw. Since the bottoms of these are longer than the tops, this is how we have to do it. Then you're just going to pair all of these up with the short side facing in. And you can kind of see where I'm going with this. And you just push all these together to the center, and voila. A star was born. It's a good movie. It really is. So this is just your kind of 3-dimensional basic star. I actually want one of these rays to come way out to the bottom. So since we know that the tops of these will fit, the only thing that we're going to have to change is this back part. Let's go ahead and put one together. Okay, so for the bottom ray, or the long ray, we want it to look something like this. So I cut this out earlier just as a part of a prototype. It's about 14 inches long total. I think that I actually wanted it a little bit longer. So I'm going to make this thing I'm going to make this thing about 16 inches tall. The short side of this we'll cut using our 60-degree block, which is going to give us 30-degree edges, just like the rest of our star. But for the bottom of this, since we're bringing it even further out, we're going to have to do something just a little different. So using the second strip from my fence picket material, I'm going to go ahead and put a 30-degree angle on each end. Now that those cuts are made, let me show you how to set this up for the super long acute angle. All right, so now that we have our 30-degree cuts on each end of this board, let's go ahead and set everything up to make our super duper acute angle. Yeah, whatever you want to call it. So with this one, it really comes down to preference on how long that you actually want this to be. I want mine to be about 16 inches long total. You can make yours any length that you want. So to do that, I'm simply going to measure down 16 inches and make a mark. Then I'm just going to use a straight edge to connect this corner to my 16-inch mark. I'm not exactly sure what this angle is. I just know that I want it. Okay, now that we have that one marked, I'm just going to flip my board around, and we'll do the exact same thing on this side. So the jig that we were using earlier really is not going to work for this, so we're pretty much done with that. And since we're only needing 2 parts of this, let me show you the easiest way to do it. And essentially, if you didn't want to make the other jig, you could do this for every single one of your parts. It's up to you. So essentially what I'm needing to do is to lock this piece down at the angle that I've drawn onto the board. And to do that, I'm going to line the board up so that the 2 tips of my drawn line are actually touching the edge of the board. Then I could use a piece of scrap wood at an angle to lock this down. Or in this case, since I'm not going to be using this part of my board, I'm just going to run a couple of screws through my material. Since the offcut is what I'm going to be keeping, you don't have to worry about any screw holes in the wood. Then we'll just line the edge of the board up with our blade, make our cut. Once this first cut's made, I'm just going to flip this board around and do the exact same thing to the opposite end. Now with this cut, let's head back to our star. Let's see how it fits. All right, so again, this is the look that we had before, and this is our freshly cut pieces. We're just going to take one of these out, slide this in, and voila. This is a totally different look. So I'm really liking this. I think that I'm actually going to paint this one. I'm going to go ahead and make some of these cuts just on the old wood that I had cut down. Again, you can use pallet wood for this. You can use really any type of scrap wood, and you can come up with a ton of different types of looks and styles. So I'm going to go ahead and get this painted or stained, whatever I finally make up my mind on. And then you could actually stop there if you'd like. Me, you know, I kind of like to push the limits on things, so I'm going to add a little bit more dimension to this, by adding some extra rays in between each one of these. We'll see how it turns out. Let's go ahead and get our center rays cut, and these are just going to be diamonds. So just a tip, if you're going to be doing this step, go ahead and do this before you paint or stain, and go ahead and paint everything at the same time. So basically I'm just going to take what's left of my fence picket material. If you remember, we left sharp ends on each side. I'm just going to square those off. Then I'm going to head back to the table saw and rip this board down to 2 inches. Then we'll take our new 2-inch board back to the miter saw, set our miter saw for 45 degrees, and make our first cut on the end. Once we have our first cut, I'm going to measure over 2 7/8 from the bottom of my angle. And this mark will be where my second cut ends. And that gives us a diamond. So now with our first one cut, we don't have to measure anymore. We can simply overlay this and use it as a template. And we'll be cutting 6 of these parts. Once we have all 6 cut, go ahead and paint or stain these things up the way that you would like. And then we'll get them attached to our star. Okay, so I decided to paint this. I'm going to do a couple of different layers and attempt to give it a 3D look. I'm going to start off with a light coat of black on everything. I'm painting mine with all of my parts kind of in place, because I don't really need to paint anywhere that the parts will be attached. Once that black dries, I'm going to go over the entire thing with a coat of white. Okay, so this is where we're at right now. Went ahead and cut out all of the pieces for this one. Something really cool that kind of just happened by mistake is on pretty much all of reclaimed material, you're going to have one side that's lighter than the other side. It gives it this alternating color look, which I really like. So even if you're using new material, keep this in mind on how it looks. You could stain each one of these a different color if you would like, or you could actually paint each one of these a different color. But what I'm going to do to this white one to attempt to give it a 3-dimensional look is to lightly sand each edge of every piece. Then whenever you put this back together, it's almost going to seem like the centers are raised. Now you could actually do this really easily with a router table. This is another way to get that look just by tricking the eye. And that's all that it is just a little bit of sanding to give it this 3-dimensional look. Then I'll do the same thing on the edges of my small pieces. And then for my natural wood piece, I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing. I think it'll look pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these parts sanded down. I'm going to be ready to put these things together. If you enjoy videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. Okay, so now that we have all of our parts sanded up, now we need to glue up our main parts. So you can do this a couple of different ways. You can actually lay this out on a piece of 1/4-inch plywood, trace this out, cut it, and actually just glue it to the plywood. I'm going to start off by gluing each one of these halves together, and then I'm going to put it all together. And I know that you've seen me do this before, but for my glue up, I like to use a mixture of wood glue and CA glue. The wood glue takes about an hour to dry, but with the CA glue, you can handle this stuff immediately. So the CA glue will actually act like a clamp while the wood glue dries. Then once we have all of our paired parts glued, let's go ahead and glue all of these together. And honestly, the CA glue alone would probably do the trick. The only problems that I've found with CA glue is that it can sometimes become brittle. Let's say if you drop the project. Right, so once we have this all glued up the way that we want, we're actually going to flip this over and then we're going to install our diamonds. Now with our star face down, we'll install our diamonds to the back. And basically that's all that I'm going to do. So line up the edges of the diamonds to the edges of my rays here. So I'm going to put some wood glue on the back and just kind of set these in place. If you line the tip of the diamond up with this crease, the opposite end should be in the direct center. Now you can also use CA glue for this, but I'm going to go ahead and throw in a couple of brad nails on each one of these just to lock all of my parts in together. Okay, so I haven't done this in a very long time. I have definitely done this before, but I forgot to change out my nails from nailing the backs on this material, which turned out really cool. But this material is 3/4 of an inch thick. This material is only about 1/2 of an inch thick. So whenever I went to flip this thing over for my grand reveal, it stuck. I've nailed it to my table. Yeah, like the whole thing. Like there's a bunch of nails, all of those. are into my table. So if anybody else out there has ever nailed their project to the table, leave me a note in the comments so I can feel at least a little bit better about this. The good thing is this is going to be a rustic star. So I'm going to let all of this glue dry, then I'm going to pry this up and actually see what kind of damage that I have. You guys ready for this? This is my prying chisel from doing this several times before. Actually came up not too bad. Now the grand reveal. It's not going to be as grand, but... So from a distance, looks super awesome. Get in close. Nails, nails, nails. Yeah. I think we can fix it. Just going to add to the rustic look. Okay, so an important part of woodworking is learning how to fix your mistakes. It's actually one of the most important parts. And today it looks like we're going to be doing just that. So since these nails are actually sticking up about 1/8 of an inch, there's really not a whole lot that I can do with them like this. So my glue's dried. The issue is the nails are sticking out. So what I figured that I would do is, instead of trying to do something with these nails on the front of the project, just drive them back into the back. And for that, I'm going to be using this little booger. It's just a little spring nail punch. If you don't have one, get one. They're dirt cheap and super handy. So I'm going to throw this up on a couple pieces of scrap wood. That way I don't just drive these nails back into my table from the opposite side. I'll be able to blend these nail marks in a bit with the sander and make them look a little more natural. Check it out. Did we salvage it? I actually think that I like this look even better and may actually go down a little further. As far as the nails in the back, there's a couple of different things that I can do. I could either clip these off with a little pair of snips, or if you put a board across these two to hang it off the wall with, you really don't have to worry about anything. That's up to you. And check this out. Okay, so these things actually turned out awesome. A lot bigger than what I actually expected. But the cool thing about this project is you can make them as large or small as you would like. The only thing that you would have to do is decrease the width of your material. So this was my favorite. It turned out awesome. The only thing that we had to do with it is use the front and the back of the material just to create this color contrast. You could actually get this exact same look just by staining the front of a board one color and the back of the board a little lighter or a darker color. But this was made out of a piece of that busted scrap wood that most people would just burn. And then this white one turned out great as well. Now this one would definitely be more for the holidays. So many different options that you could do with this. You could highlight the joints even more to create that three-dimensional look. Kind of like this. Or honestly, if you just sanded down every other board just a little bit further, you'd probably get a super awesome look as well. But again, just like most of my videos, the entire point of this is just to show you that you can take something that is dirt cheap, or in this case actually free, and create something that is awesome for yourself as a gift or to sell. You do not have to have a ton of money or super fancy tools to get into woodworking. As you've heard me say for a long time now, you really just have to have the belief in yourself. And then once you have that, there's only one thing left to do. Get up, get out, and get your make on. Till next time, we'll see you. Imagine taking a pile of wood and turning it into something amazing. Now, imagine doing that without years of frustration. You do not need a fancy workshop, expensive tools, or years of experience. With Woodworking Kickstart, you'll build confidence and real skills in no time. So you can spend years making mistakes and learning the hard way like I did, or you can start building with confidence today. So join me in Woodworking Kickstart and let's get your journey started.